to Life on Earth. Welcome to Life on Earth. Welcome to Life on Earth. Welcome to Life on Earth. That's right.
It's Life on Earth.
It is. Hello, you good people. Thank you so much for joining us for Life on Earth. As you can see, I've got copious show notes. Someday somebody will tell me what copious actually means. I've heard people use it that way. Today is Thursday, March 3rd, 2022. Holy heck. The masks are coming off. Have you heard the good news? All over the place. Finally, the masks are coming off. And I'll tell you what, the gloves are coming off in this show because we got to talk.
Yeah, let's talk.
You know, in her 1976 speech entitled Philosophy, Who Needs It?, delivered to the West Point Military Academy cadets, Ayn Rand said in regard to her philosophy, and I quote, "Formally, I call it objectivism, but informally, I call it a philosophy for living on Earth," unquote. Now, that being the case, it stands to reason that other things being equal, objectivists, people who admire, who adopt, who study this philosophy, objectivists can and should be the most successful, the most benevolent, the most efficacious, the most positive, the most gracious, the most cheerful, optimistic, happy people on Earth.
Let's do it.
Let's do this thing. The reason why I brought back the original show intro that explains the title, Life on Earth. Last week, I posted this on Facebook. Now you're all wondering, but actually I'm going to take a moment before I say what I posted on Facebook. And believe me, you want to hear this. But first, because we are part of the Ayn Rand Center UK, oh my gosh, the big London extravaganza is coming up. We're going to talk about that too. But because we are on the Ayn Rand Center UK channel on YouTube right now, among other things, we're looking at the chat. Thank you for being in the chat. Thank you for joining us at youtube.com. And Jeff Bannister says he ain't watching. No, what he actually said was, and he put in a super chat, $10 to go to the ARC UK. I have to work tonight, so I don't have to beg for someone else to sacrifice their life to take care of me. And sleep is required now. I will be watching later. And he did put in dollars for that super chat. Mary Aline is in as well for $2. You can put in dollars.
Thank you,
You can
Mary
put in
Lee.
pounds. You can put, YouTube will take care of that. Jeff's contribution was in Canadian, but it's kind of like real money. Actually, I laugh about that because we do dollars, but it all goes to ARC UK. It all goes to support the good cause. Talk to us. Go to the chat. Put in some chat. If you got a few dollars, put in a super chat. Money goes to ARC UK. And if you're not already a member, join the ARC UK at aynrandcenter.co.uk/membership. Link will appear in the chat. Now, what did I post on Facebook that you've absolutely got to hear about, to think about, that I want to talk about? I put up a post that said, why altruism? Now,
Why altruism?
Now, as
Like
an
that.
admirer of Ayn Rand, as an objectivist, you put up why altruism and you expect all the altruism bashing. But what I wrote in the post was, why altruism? Serious and compelling arguments only in favor of altruism, please.
Yes. What's the high-hanging fruit
Right.
in the promoting of altruism? So.
And I have to say, at first, I was very frustrated because I didn't get a lot of serious and compelling arguments. What I got were the arguments against.
One person said, crickets.
And then I realized this, of course, the failure, the error was on my part, because so many people in our inner circle, and then that tight group of people,
The echo chamber.
Of course, would respond to that with, well, no, because altruism is terrible. And here's all the reasons why. Well, no, I get all that. But you see, what I was looking for, and what I am looking for, and what I think I've found, and what we're ready to talk about. I wrote, especially among modern intellectuals and popularizers, I want to know, why do they accept altruism as a moral ideal?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not necessarily looking for a full case, but point me in the right direction in regard to people like Stephen Payne. I mean, intelligent people, people that many of us greatly admire, people who are moving the cause of liberty and rationality forward. People like Steven Pinker and Julia Galef and Barry Weiss and Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson and Jay Shetty and Tim Ferriss and all these people I really admire. Well, some of them are more mixed cases, but these are not idiots. And they're not all power lusters. Why do they? They've got a whole organization called Effective Altruism. Sam Harris has a pledge that people take to give away 10% of their pre-tax, not their post-tax income.
That's so Catholic.
It's so Catholic, 10%, like he pulled that number out of thin air.
Yeah. A little bit of plagiarism there, Sam Harris.
Yep. So early on, I did get an excellent comment from David Marsilia, who responded with a good academic recap. He wrote, Robert, has there ever been an argument besides Kant and Comte? Premise 1, morality derives from duty, not inclination, which was put forward commonly by the Stoics. Premise 2, duty can often coincide with inclination, i.e. an action is consistent with duty, but is also desirable. Premise 3, if duty coincides with inclination, there is no way to tell if the person is acting from duty or from inclination. And premise 4, people are naturally inclined to do what's in their self-interest. So the conclusion, as David wraps it up, the only way an action can be known to be moral, i.e. to be motivated by duty, is when it is against one's inclinations, i.e. against one's self-interest. That was a great recap. And I'm going to assume that he wrote that, even though he may have, like I often do, stole it from someone else. It is essentially the Kantian or the Comte understanding of morality. It is possible to do things for other people, but if it coincides with your interests, you can never be sure. Maybe it was self-interest. So you can't really be sure unless it actually works against your self-interest. That sounds academic. Who really does that? And yet, there was an interesting comment, and this was interesting because it wasn't a mind-body split like you would usually get with this subject, but a mind-mind split. Richard wrote, it's a holdover from the bicameral mind. In an unintegrated person, the subconscious resents the conscious mind's control over their lives. So they, the subconscious mind, impress upon the conscious mind an imperative of self-destruction in the hope that by weakening its brother hemisphere with urges to destroy itself, it will emerge triumphant as the dominant hemisphere. Now, I didn't agree with that. In fact, I thought that was pretty wild.
But
then I realized that that is essentially a biological or evolutionary psychological parallel to exactly what we're expected to swallow, and not just from Kant and Comte, as we'll get to, but even in many of the popularizers' version of altruism.
A self-self dichotomy, mind-mind dichotomy.
Now, I asked Mary Aline for permission to share her comment, and I didn't actually receive it yet, but then I realized it was a public thread. So I'm sorry, Mary Aline, but it's out there already. You know, everything I post on social media is public, rare exceptions to that. So it's always a bit of a warning. Anybody who comments on my stuff, I am making you a star. So Mary Aline humorously and irresistibly,
I like the story.
She put this comment. I was helping a fellow Toastmaster work on a speech recently. He was both distraught and outraged at the unwillingness to self-sacrifice that he saw around him. I didn't have the time or inclination to go down that road with him. I asked him what he wanted the audience to take away from his speech. He wanted people to vote Democrat. We kicked that around a bit. I gave him some suggestions about clarity and civility. He emailed me a few days later to say his speech would be about his mother's first week with her grandson. I love that story. I love the very idea that as soon as you take somebody who advocates self-sacrifice, and to whom that actually means nothing more than continue to vote for the left, excuse me, that they just lose everything that supposedly propped up their arguments. There's nothing there. There's no there,
right,
to use an old cliche.
So I mean, he goes to his mother's first week with her grandson. So that's very sweet and nice. Hopefully that was a value to him more than railing against people about not sacrificing enough. How miserable.
It's part of what makes the story so cute is that he did actually lose the indignation and go with the value.
Right.
Which is exactly what he should have done in the first place. Rob Aviera made an interesting point, which this reflects an answer that Peter Schwartz gave. Peter Schwartz recently on the Yara and Brooke show the other day. Link is in my show notes on Facebook. You can look at afterwards links to the interesting things we'll be talking about. And Peter Schwartz was on the Yara and Brooke show promoting the re-release of The Tyranny of Need, originally released as In Defense of Selfishness. He gives an interesting explanation for why he changed the title. And Rob wrote, you could say the same thing about sacrifice, selfishness, selflessness, reason, egoism, self-interest, pride, etc. In regard to, well, people don't understand what you mean by the word altruism. They don't understand what you mean by the concept. Rand knew, this is Rob, Rand knew that all of these needed to be redefined or re-examined to take them back to their fundamental meaning. See, Peter Schwartz addressed this really well. During the question period of his Yara and Brooke appearance, he pointed out that even with terms like pragmatism, which many people think means practical, or environmentalism, which many people just think means eliminating pollution, when using these words with non-objectivists, there's good reason to clarify what you mean by such terms. And this takes me to a conversation that Amy and I had about the topic of altruism. So we're driving in my very fancy car, which if I had bought a cheaper car, I could have probably saved the lives of some starving children. And we're driving, and I said, yeah, we had this discussion about why altruism. And people are associating altruism with the left. Mm-hmm. And attacking the left. I'm like, that was not the point of this conversation. And Amy was quick to point out that the right is guilty of all of the same crimes.
Oh, yes.
Because what I said was that what I see among these smarter people, the Jordan Petersons.
Yeah. Robert's question was, why are these people so smart? Why are they still falling for altruism and self-sacrifice and calling the other person selfish?
Yeah, and good people.
Yeah.
Again, really smart. People much smarter than I am. People probably smarter than you are. You know, for all of my criticisms of Sam Harris, he's not an idiot. You know, somebody like Julia Galef. These are not, and they're not corrupt people either. The thing is, people like that, the Tim Ferrisses of the world, Steven Pinker, these people who accept altruism in their personal lives, they don't self-sacrifice.
Right.
They're self-assertive, they're self-developing, they're attempting to achieve self-mastery.
They call it self-care.
They do self-care and self-love. And all these different selves. And if you told them, well, are you for selfishness? They would say, oh, no.
Oh, no.
No.
Not me. Mm-mm.
They don't accept selfishness, not as living 100% for yourself. They believe, and not without evidence, that you can have and do and be both. You can be for self-assertion and self-sacrifice.
But, you know, they'll be hard pressed to talk about what in their lives they've done to self-sacrifice, you know, in other words, going back to the, so in other words, your action needs to be consistent with kind of out of context duty. It cannot have any relation to any desire, value, or inclination you have. That doesn't make a damn bit of sense. And yet that
it doesn't as a consistent principle.
Right.
But again, that gets back to what we talked about in the car, which is people don't expect it to be a consistent principle. They expect to do both. You know, Amy was quick, you were quick to point out the many, many calls for selflessness from the right.
Yes.
You know, the obvious one that always comes up, but he's so representative, is Ben Shapiro.
Yeah.
Who thinks that what selfishness means And he's not even thinking of it as hedonism. He really thinks this is what self-assertion would mean if you took it as a principle. What selfishness would mean is you have a wife, you have kids, you have a family, and you go to the bar every night and pick up whatever chicks you can and sleep with them. And he's said this time and whenever he's questioned about it, whenever an objectivist or anybody with that perspective asks him, I've heard him say it several ways, several times. Yeah, this is what self-interest is. It's why we have such a thing as nationalism, because people want to put the nation, not as a patriot does, admire the nation, love your country, but put the nation ahead of your own interests. Listen to Yaron Hazony talk about the family in the same way that Ayn Rand used to rip on Ronald Reagan for the family. You know, you have to get the right mystic tones, because when we're talking about the family, it's something else. It's not like your own personal interests. It's something bigger and a bit larger than yourself. Mm-hmm. So you pointed out that this appeal to denying one's self-interest applies not just to sleeping around. It applies to the immigration question. It applies to drug legalization. It applies in spades to anti-abortion.
Yes.
It applies to prohibitions of obscenity and pornography and even prostitution and other unacceptable behaviors.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, especially in the anti-abortion arguments. And now, can I jump in here and just
Please
explain some things here? First of all, I want to read something from one of my very favorite books. It's The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Here's a reading for you. All right, so there's Colin and there's Mary. Colin is an invalid. Mary is the new girl in the town, right?
Yes.
They're both young children, and they're trying to get along. And they can't get along, and they keep arguing. And Colin cries, "You are a selfish thing." And Mary says, "But what are you? Selfish people always say that you're selfish. Anyone is selfish who doesn't do what they want." And so they go back, you're more selfish than I am, da, 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 da. Well, what are we talking about? Here, Mary is introducing something really wonderful here. And she's saying that selfish people always call other people selfish to manipulate them into doing what they want them to do. And that happens all the time, so I often see this bantering about of the word selfish and selfishness is evil in the context, or in that altruism and helping other people are good, always in the context of trying to belittle the other side. We hate the left and they're selfish, and we hate the right and they're selfish. It's really nonsensical. And so there's I didn't see the quote in your notes here, but I want to go ahead and just get into it. This is something from Ayn Rand, where she says there are two moral questions which altruism lumps together into one package deal.
Yes.
So number one, what are values? Okay. You would think that if you want to survive as a human being, if you want to live and flourish and live until the next year, into the next crop season, however, you're going to ask yourself, what are your values? You got food, you got water, got shelter, got clothing. However, so altruism completely ignores that question. And all they say is, well, who should be the beneficiary of these values? So They completely drop that context.
Altruism substitutes the second for the first. Mm-hmm. It evades the task of defining a code of moral values, thus leaving man, in fact, without moral guidance.
As freaking heathens.
Yes.
Honestly.
Heathens. Heathens is a good word. Heathens and hedonists.
Yes.
What nowadays they would call narcissists.
Yeah, that's very true.
But what we would call emotionalists.
Yes.
Whether they're the complete self-sacrificers or the ones that want to sacrifice you to them.
Right. Which side of the coin of sacrifice do you want?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And so, altruism. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say in that regard, Mary Aline, who is back in the super chat twice.
Thank you.
In her second says, how is it selfish to destroy your life? And she says that in regard to Ben Shapiro and anybody else who would tell you, well, if you did what you really wanted, you would trample all over everybody else. And as Mary Eileen says, how is it selfish
And
to
again,
destroy your life?
Ben Shapiro and people like him are just going to completely ignore the context of what are values. What are values, and how do you actually survive as a human being, as a conceptually cognitive, volitional human being, looking towards the long term to try to keep yourself alive and to try to pursue happiness?
That's why it's fun to see kids growing up these days with objectivist parents, because the ones who at least got the right grounding early on. You think of this passage from Francis Hodgson Burnett. If instead of saying selfish, if these kids equated selfish with rationally self-interested. And imagine a child saying, "You are a rationally self-interested person." It'd be like, what else do you want me to be? What on earth are you expecting from anybody? And real quick, Allison just popped in with a super chat, $5 to the RCUK. And she says, late to the party, but I love this topic. Y'all 100% right on this. Not even just being called selfish, but even worse, a disappointment. Oh, yeah. Well, your kids come out selfish. What could be more disappointing than you didn't come up as a properly altruistic, self-sacrificing, self-effacing, self-loathing person?
You're an what you say is you're an abusive and manipulative git. Go
to your
away.
Parents, yes.
Well, maybe not while you're living with them.
Yeah.
But
well, you don't have to say it out loud. You just have to know it.
Yes.
It's you just want to say to, not just Ben Shapiro, but to these good people, do you believe in self-development? Do you believe in self-improvement? How about self-responsibility, self-care, self-assertion, self-reliance, self-mastery, selfishness? Well, wait, no. Self-interest. Oh, wait, no. Self-love. No, you should be self-loving. You'll spend all your time looking in a mirror like Narcissus, the guy who gave us that word. Well, what should it be? Should it be self-abasement? Should we aspire to be self-deprecating?
Self-destructive, perhaps?
Yes. Self-hatred, self-loathing? No. I'm all for the selfishness, the self-interest, the self-love, the self-development, the self-responsibility.
Yes. Okay. I'd like to go ahead and I went ahead and I did an exercise.
Yes.
And I think everyone should do this. This is something that kind of evolved out of running an objectivist group for, I don't know how many, a decade.
Decades, if you count all the groups we've been involved in.
So yeah, we are the founders of Great Lakes Objectivists. Nice to meet you.
We're the founders. Right. I like that. We're the founders.
The founders. So
we should start a college called the Founders College. No, don't do that.
Anyway, so we've had people in our living room for many, many years, and I played a party game called Joe Q Public, and you put concepts in a hat. And, concepts such as primacy of consciousness or epistemology or, and all of these different things.
These are complicated topics, but
hatred of the good for being the good.
But how would you explain such concepts to
Joe Q Public, the guy on the street? So how do you explain that? So I did this Joe Q Public exercise about altruism and selfishness. And what I thought Joe Q Public, when I asked him, what is altruism and what is selfishness? I think what he would say. Yeah,
it's a great game because it's kind of a variation on reduction, except we're not reducing it to the facts of reality. We're reducing it to the commonly held knowledge of the average American.
Yeah, and let me know if I'm wrong, if you think that this is not correct, but this is what I have for altruism, what Joe Q Public would say.
How would you explain altruism to Joe Q Public?
He would say that altruism is the dictionary definition, which is the belief in or practice of disinterested or selfless concern for the well-being of others.
Well, that sounds harsh right there.
Yeah. And it leads me to a negative evaluation of or feeling for people who I perceive as being unwilling to value others.
Oh, okay.
That is. So in
greedy,
other words,
selfish bastards.
Those greedy, selfish bastards. And that's, so in other words, altruism as a moral code is telling me who to watch out for and who to avoid. And what disvalues to avoid. It's not really telling me what to do positively in my life. It may tell me, he may say, helping other people makes me feel good. But again, that's not exactly selflessness, because if it gives you any kind of value, even, in this case, it's not a very well-defined value, but it's giving them some kind of value, then obviously isn't that selfish?
So if altruism is an ideal and it's disinterested and selfless, what does that tell you about selfishness?
Yes, that is interested and selfish and concerned for the well-being of yourself.
Good.
And so what Joe Q. Public, when I asked him, well, what is selfishness?
Yeah.
And he said, it's a desire to control, abuse, or use other people, or disregard the feelings of others, or otherwise treat people unfairly. It's like narcissism.
Oh.
And that's the kind of thing that I see that a lot of people talk about. And they talk about it, again, in this context of not how I can use this moral code to pursue values in my life, but to avoid the disvalues, to avoid the bad people, the selfish people.
Right.
That's the context I'm seeing here.
But if that's true, and that's Joe Q. Public's understanding of it, then when do you get to express pride? You can't be proud if you don't sacrifice, but if you do sacrifice, isn't your pride a contradiction?
Mm-hmm.
See, I have to jump to a quote from Ayn Rand from the article Moral Inflation here. And I'm going to cheat. I'm going to take it out of the lexicon. Even though, quoting Ayn Rand, even though altruism declares that it is more blessed to give than to receive, it does not work that way in practice. The givers are never blessed. The more they give, the more is demanded of them. Complaints, reproaches, and insults are the only response they get for practicing altruism's virtues or for their actual virtues. Altruism cannot permit a recognition of virtue. It cannot permit self-esteem or moral innocence. Guilt is altruism's stock in trade, and the inducing of guilt is its only means of self-perpetuation. If the giver is not kept under a torrent of degrading, demeaning accusations, he might take a look around and put an end to the self-sacrificing. Coming out of that discussion that Peter Schwartz had with Yaron Brook, I thought about the way he talked about the way we define words. In fact, Peter Schwartz has even gone so far as to say, we talked about this before, that selfishness can refer to motivation. Mm-hmm. So that Bernie Madoff acted from selfishness. Harry Binswanger disagrees with him on that. But the point is, once you clarify what your words mean, right, at least you're having the same conversation. And I thought maybe that applies here. If people like the people we're talking about actually understood altruism as necessitating significant self-sacrifice, not self-assertion, maybe they'd understand differently. But then I realized that the willingness not just to practice benevolence, but to openly call for altruism in politics makes the point. Altruism can't be fully innocent, certainly not by anybody who advocates it in politics. So here's where I think the modern intellectuals, the intelligentsia, still see the world through the rose-colored glasses of prosperity. They think it's not a sacrifice because we're all doing so well. Mm-hmm. They take Sam Harris's pledge to give away a minimum of 10% of their wealth. And they do so from having such prosperity that living on 90% of their income is not a significant inconvenience. It's hardly even a significant difference. The hardworking people feel that squeeze much more. Mm-hmm. Despite the fact that 10% of $50,000 is much less than 10% of $5 million.
And I should say, I want to say thank you so very much, Ian Wheatley, for the £5. He says thank you in a heart,
which is more than $5.
And then he along with what you're just saying, he thinks He says, I think Joe Q Pack or Joe Six Pack, I mean,
Yes.
thinks altruism is once you've got most basics covered for yourself, you should give some portion of the rest to others.
Yeah. Once you got everything you need.
Yeah. But again, it doesn't tell you who are the good people to help. It doesn't tell you what kind of portion.
And what's in it for you?
Yeah. And why would you do it in the first place? Why would it even come up in your mind? Is it coming up in your mind because you're being manipulated by other people
Exactly.
who are calling you selfish? Is that your motivation?
so yeah, I think I was a little too, I'm still a little too quick.
But good job, Ian.
To say benevolence when sometimes it really is altruism.
Mm-hmm.
So Ayn Rand wrote in Faith and Force, The Destroyers of the Modern World, but she also gave us a speech. What is the moral code of altruism? The basic principle of altruism is that man has no right to exist for his own sake, that service to others is the only justification of his existence, and that self-sacrifice is his highest moral duty, virtue, and value. Do not confuse altruism with kindness, goodwill, or respect for the rights of others. These are not primaries, but consequences, which in fact altruism makes impossible. The irreducible primary of altruism, the basic absolute, is self-sacrifice, which means self-immolation, self-abnegation, self-denial, self-destruction, which means the self as the standard of evil, the selfless as the standard of good. Mm-hmm. Do not hide behind such superficialities as whether you should or should not give a dime to a beggar. That's not the issue. The issue is whether or not you do or do not have the right to exist without giving him that dime. The issue is whether you must keep buying your life, dime by dime, from any beggar who might choose to approach you. The issue is whether the need of others is the first mortgage on your life and the moral purpose of your existence. The issue is whether man is to be regarded as a sacrificial animal. Any man of self-esteem will answer no. Altruism says yes.
Yep, very good.
That line, do not confuse altruism with kindness, goodwill, or respect for the rights of others. That is something I'm all too prone to do. Because again, I see good people argue for it, and they do so from the perspective of prosperity and benevolence.
Right.
They can afford to say those things, or at least they think they can afford to say those things.
Well, they trust themselves to make, they think, the right judgment about who to promote, who to help and who not to help. And without really understanding what the virtues are to begin with. I mean, I suppose there are virtues out there that people have defined, oftentimes through self-help books, oftentimes through other means other than religion, like honesty and integrity, but it's really vague still.
Yeah. There's a libertarian bumper sticker you've all seen before that says, socialism, ideas so good you have to force them on people.
Yes.
Is it even altruism if you voted the government to force everybody to do it? But that's the moral premise that makes you think it's okay. Or if you listen to Joe Biden the other night on the State of the Union address, we're not going to ask anything from the middle class and the poor. We're just going to make sure the rich pay their fair share.
Yes.
As if the rich, having created the businesses that produce such magnificence and provide a living to so many people, somehow owe more.
Yeah. And there's where I wouldn't even call altruism a moral code, an incomplete moral code, if anything. I would call it a form of manipulation.
Yes.
And, from my notes here, I said, so basically, why do good people fall for altruism? Why is it that the left will say, well, we need to have, looting and plunder and thievery enacted by our government to go after those people who have money so that we can take that and use it to then redistribute it to the poor. And what makes it so that somebody from the left will automatically assume that rich person is evil, that rich people is flawed. And I think that is, I always think of altruism in terms of a context, and it's completely outside of morality, as objectivists know what morality is. And it's often just used as a weapon, as a moral weapon against people who they want to get them to obey without question. So the assumption is that that man is either evil or inherently flawed. And so the left's assumption of people who make money are inherently flawed or evil. And then the right's assumption of women who want to alter their reproductive processes, those women are inherently evil or flawed. So it's a very interesting weapon in the moral war, and one that really needs to be more fleshed out and well-defined, as we are doing right now here on Life on Earth,
Yes.
which is part of Ayn Rand Center UK. And without Ayn Rand Center UK, with their help, we wouldn't be here today. And hopefully,
speaking of that,
speaking of that,
we mentioned that super chats, they don't come to us. They go to the ARC UK, and we're good with that. That's what we're all about. But Bonnie, who is in with a very large contribution, says, and this is great: can you be for selfishness when you don't yet know that you have a self? Altruism is the default because we don't know this observable fact that we have a self. We're individuals because human consciousness is volitional. Now, Bonnie understands the issue of free will, I think, better than most people do out there. We've had this conversation before. And she's absolutely right to bring that into the conversation. And the reason why self-interest is moral, the reason why selfishness is a virtue, the reason why liberty, why the rights of the individual matter, is because the locus, the location, the locus of free will is the individual human reasoning mind. Mm-hmm. You could put people together in a group, and you could have a very valuable group, but only because each of those individuals is choosing to think and to work and to produce and to work with others. You get to have a whole nation like the United States, more productive than any other nation in history. Run the numbers, look at the GDP, look at the fact that this country is only 250 years old. And yet every other country on earth, countries that have been civilized for millennia, are hard pressed to catch up with us. Take China, a country with 4 times the primary natural resource, individual human beings, only recently matched our GDP. They should be 4 times what we are. But they do not have the respect for rights that frees the individual human mind. So Bonnie's absolutely right. Can you have selfishness? Can you have self-assertion? Can you be an individual when you don't yet know that you have a self? Mm-hmm. I mentioned Sam Harris earlier. He is in the rogues gallery, in the leadership of the rogues gallery of people who claim that we don't have free will. Mm. And the way that he interprets that is bizarre. But to me, it simply means that if you don't have free will, you are happening. You are a thing that is happening in the universe, like an animal. And it's so bizarre to talk to you on a computer and a microphone and a camera with all this technology over wires that are spanning not just the United States, but the United Kingdom, and not just the UK, but the entire freaking world. And we're supposed to believe that that was not the result of individual thinking and initiative and will and values, but simply a thing that happened because we are reasoning creatures like animals, except we've got words and not just barking.
Yeah, and there's no way to actually introspect back about exactly what your reasoning was.
No,
it just happened.
Well, if there was a reason, that's the denial of free will. So anyway, it gets complicated. If you don't already follow Don Watkins, read his Substack. He wrote a couple of papers recently on free will, an initial one and then a second one answering his critics. Really good stuff, especially Bonnie, if you haven't seen that yet, because I know you love this topic. And incidentally, we're wondering if you're going to be able to come to England. We'd love to see you for the ARC UK week.
I know Shadow Blade in the comments, he says he's coming. So
Outstanding.
cool. It's gonna be so great, guys. Oh my goodness.
Outstanding.
Well, here's an opportunity for me to tell you all what
Yes.
my definition of altruism is.
Your definition of
Per
altruism.
Amy Nasir, aka philosopher.
Good.
of
How
the
do you
world.
define that term?
Okay. So altruism is an incomplete and defective moral code that only addresses how to interact with others. It has nothing to say about how to live as an individual human being or acknowledges the fact that you must live as an individual, how to maintain your survival, how to find happiness into the short or long term, and the things, the values that will help you live. It says nothing about any of that. It especially does not address how to think and what method of thinking is effective for your survival and flourishing. It's nothing. I mean, it is a lame ass, half-assed moral code. Pardon my French. It is, and it's usually only used to put down the people who you don't like or who somebody doesn't like in order to manipulate them to do what they want unthinkingly. It's just disgusting. So there you are. I do, by the way, have my letter to Stephen Hassan. If anybody wants to hear me read it, it's a little bit long, but I can kind of condense it down a little bit. But I thought it was a real nice working of explaining to somebody who believes in altruism, who is a bright thinking person. This guy is actually a really good guy, but he falls for altruism and he falls for the conventional definition of selfishness. And I explained to him what is what. So maybe we can get into that. We actually have, let's see. Oh, Ian also says, Joe Q Public, why, if you ask him, why do we need the government? They'd answer, because some people are greedy and won't give enough or at all, and they'll free ride. So, okay, well, by what standard are you going to gauge how much you're going to give and why? And what does this altruism have anything to do with your actual moral value judgments and your actual virtues that help you to attain your values? So yes, altruism. Oh, thank you very much. We've got 2 pounds from the Shadow Blade. He says, Robert and Amy, always a highlight of the week. Thank you so much. It's very heartwarming for me. That's wonderful. So Robert has looked up something really fantastic.
Have I?
Yes, you have.
Well, during the conversation, I couldn't resist looking this up. I've read it before on the show. This is from We the Living. And a version of it is also reprinted in the early Ayn Rand. What is the answer to this? Again, the point of my asking the question, I want to understand why the better people still hold altruism, if not as a standard, then at least as a virtue. And I think back to not only have we quoted from Anthem and the Fountainhead, but We the Living. The passage in We the Living, Kira, our heroine of the story, had never been in love. The only hero she had known was a Viking, whose story she read as a child, a Viking whose eyes never looked farther than the point of his sword, but there was no boundary to the point of his sword. A Viking who walked through life breaking barriers and reaping victories, who walked through ruins while the sun made a crown over his head, but he walked light and straight without noticing its weight. A Viking who laughed at kings, who laughed at priests, who looked at heaven only when he bent for a drink over a mountain brook, and there, overshadowing the sky, he saw his own picture. A Viking who lived but for the joy and wonder and the glory of the God that was himself. Kira did not remember the books she read before that legend. She did not want to remember the ones she read after it. But through the years that followed, she remembered the end of the legend when the Viking stood on a tower over a city he had conquered. The Vikings smiled as men smile when they look up at heaven, but he was looking down. His right arm was one straight line with his lowered sword. His left arm, straight as the sword, raised a goblet of wine to the sky. The first rays of a coming sun, still unseen to the earth, struck the crystal goblet. It sparkled like a white torch. Its rays lighted the faces of those below. To a life, said the Viking, which is a reason unto itself. I think it's important to understand altruism. I think it's important to understand the mixed up mix of benevolence and altruism that people we admire are talking about when they start an effective altruism movement. I think we need to understand their good intentions, and we also need to understand why we need to fight that confusion. Because whatever their good intentions, upholding that ideal is doing as much harm as good, and maybe more. And think how much more the people we admire could do for themselves and for others. And some of them, I think, do have some sense of that idea. You know, think of Tim Ferriss. Think of people who are actually focused on productivity and on self-maximization. But if they had that clarity that comes from being able to say to a life that is an end unto itself. And that's why I think the discussion is important. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Life on Earth.
We're ending already?
We are not ending yet, because first I have to say, if you want more goodness like this,
yes.
First of all, we're going to join James Valiant tomorrow for his discussion on Leonard Peikoff's lectures.
The synthetic analytic dichotomy.
Close, the analytic synthetic dichotomy.
Almost.
James was kind enough to ask us, we're going to be doing this for a while. We're going to co-host a show with him for a few weeks. Who knows, maybe forever. And he said, well, we'll start you off then, whatever lecture you want. I said, well, my favorite Leonard Peikoff essay, the analytics. Now, Leonard has probably written more important things than that. He's probably written better things than that. But that essay was the essay. You know, as you study objectivism, at some point, you kind of reach that point where you say, oh my God, I'm an objectivist. I think this is right. This is how I want to live my life. And I think it's all true. And for me, the last domino or the last stumbling block was this issue of what do we know because of our words, our logic, and what do we know empirically from reality? Bridging that gap, the rest of ITOE, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, might have gotten me there. But it was really that essay at the end of ITOE, or in the middle of the second edition, which has all that good Q&A stuff at the end. It was that essay that did it for me, the analytics. So tomorrow, we're going to talk to James Stevens Valiant, who's much smarter than I am about these things, but we're just down there to help him get through it. We're going to talk about the analytic synthetic dichotomy. And then on Sunday at 6 o'clock, our own show, 5 Minutes with Robert Nasir, 6 p.m. Eastern time. You can join us on my YouTube channel. Incidentally, that's where you can contribute directly to us. Go to robertnasir.com and you'll find a PayPal and Patreon link. And if you want to hook us up. But in the meantime, yes, support the Ayn Rand Center UK. Your super chats did it today, a bunch of them too. Thank you. More than we usually get. Deeply appreciate that. And also become a member, aynrandcenter.co.uk. And we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much. What we're really going to do, because we're not done yet, is we're going to go over to Clubhouse. If you are on the Clubhouse platform, join us and speak your mind, say your piece.
Yeah, and I can read you some excerpts from my letter to Stephen Hassan about selfishness and about altruism, and I'd love to do that.
Amy's been writing letters lately. Amy's always been better at this than me. She writes letters to people. You think, oh, that's not going to do much good. You'd be surprised. She got a reply back. When she wrote to Barry Weiss, she got a reply from one of Barry Weiss's administrative assistants. But no, the admin is actually Barry Weiss's sister. That was so cool.
And she said, keep in touch.
Keep in touch, because
Aw.
it's funny, if you listen to the Yaron Brooks show, people will say, Yaron, you should go on Joe Rogan, you should go on Barry Weiss. And Yaron says, great, get me on there.
Yeah.
Talk to them about it.
Yeah.
He's tried to get on Joe Rogan, and Rogan hasn't
So
had him on yet.
I wrote a letter. I said,
Amy wrote a letter.
look into Yaron Brook. He's really good.
That's right. So Amy's trying to get Yaron Brook and Barry Weiss to talk. That would be a great conversation. It would be really good to hear. So we will talk to you on Clubhouse shortly. Thank you so much for joining us for Life on Earth. Also, thank you for joining us for Life on Earth.
Yes. You know what? We're all on the same planet right now.
So with that said, we will see you on Clubhouse, and to a life that is an end unto itself.
Mhm.